hello everyone, and welcome to the Scotland-Malawi Partnerships Youth Festival for 2021. This whole week has been led and designed by the wonderful Scotland-Malawi Partnership Youth Committee, and today's webinar is Young Voices on Climate Justice, run by the wonderful Dani as pictured. And today Dani will be interviewing a specialist panel of experts from across Scotland and Malawi on the issue of climate justice. So without further ado, I will hand over to the wonderful Youth Committee member and host of tonight, Dani. Dani, over to you.
Thanks so much, Louisa. Hi everyone. As Louisa just said, my name is Dani. I'm a member of the Youth Committee at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. And today's discussion is going to be focused on unpacking the topic of climate justice, particularly within the context of the partnership between Malawi and Scotland. And the aim of today will be to understand how we can move forward with a better conception of what climate justice means in both contexts, and how we might use these insights in defining our climate and social justice efforts looking to the future. I'm very excited to introduce our panel today. Joining us is Muti, team leader at Baseflow Malawi, Ben, a government relations advisor for water aid and chair of the Stop Climate Chaos Scotland International Group, Edgar, country director for Community Energy Malawi, and Holly, a 15-year-old environmentalist and activist involved with the establishment of Fridays for Future Scotland. I guess I just wanted to say, for all our viewers who are maybe less familiar with the concept, climate justice is the idea that highlights that the impacts of climate change are not borne equally by all people, and suggests that we can't consider environmental issues without considering issues of social justice. And I wonder, just before we sort of get into things, if any of the panel would like to add a little bit on how they understand the concept of climate justice. I'm not going to open to everyone just because I want to get into the juicy bit, but does anyone have something they want to add to that definition?
In my line of work, what climate justice is actually about is accountability, but accountability of a different sort. In Malawi, as Edgar's presentation demonstrated, we're more focused on trying to build people's resilience to climate change. So trying to make sure, for example, in my line of work, making sure they have water, but that water is sustainable. And what sustainable means is that borehole or that pipe system is installed properly and according to code and according to standard. Now, what is happening in the Malawi context, NGOs, donors, drilling companies are not following the recommended standards. So what the result is that borehole is not installed properly. Now, what that means is that sometimes the well dries up faster than it's supposed to. In some cases, a well is installed today, it stops working a couple of weeks later, and so on and so forth. So you find, again, in our bid as organizations to help the poor, we are perpetuating the cycle of water poverty by installing systems that are not sustainable, that will help them build the resilience they need by giving them access to clean water so that they have the resilience to fight against climate change. So for me, that's another aspect of climate justice.
Yeah, thank you for that, Muti. All of you have kind of touched on this point that countries like Malawi that have contributed the least to the climate crisis are suffering disproportionately from the impact of it. So my question is, what do you think we can do to mitigate this unfair dynamic? I wonder if, Holly, you maybe have something to start us off?
So I guess there's not really much you can do to stop climate change impacting countries like Malawi worse, but just helping people in Malawi to deal with the impacts of that. And back home, as I've said before, making sure your country is held accountable and making sure, we get to zero emissions as soon as possible. Because when obviously you've got countries like Scotland having net zero carbon targets by dates like 2045, which is obviously way too late. But I think when we look at net zero targets within rich countries, we're also only looking at the impacts of climate change within rich countries, because obviously net zero by 2045 we won't really see the impacts of that in Scotland. And I think politicians see it very much as a challenge and, a race to win rather than as an issue that will impact real people, but not necessarily in their country. So I think it's just trying to hold leaders accountable and show them that this isn't like a challenge or a race or a competition. This is an actual issue that will kill people and that will displace millions of people.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Holly's just said, but maybe just relating it directly to COP26, which we can expect in November. There's the main thing that we need to see for this injustice is that the richest countries in the world need to get on track to reducing their emissions in a way which will keep global average temperatures to 1.5. But we also can't forget that climate change is already here. We might not feel it here in Scotland, but I know that our friends in Malawi certainly feel it there. And that means that we also need a huge transfer of resource. We need more money to be coming from the countries that caused this crisis to the countries which are suffering from it now to adapt to and recover from the impacts of climate change that they're already experiencing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I wanted to maybe direct this at you, Edgar, but I was wondering what you thought about how colonization has impacted Malawian agency in sort of setting its own climate agenda, and what you think a country like Scotland might be able to do to mitigate this sort of the impact of this historically.
The subject of colonization is I think is one that is often discussed. I think especially amongst the young people, and especially those people that are into politics anyway. It is a fact that I think we are colonized for a long time, and we got our independence, even though people claim that we just have independence on paper. We still don't have economic independence, we still don't have environmental independence, and indeed even social independence, so to say. I think it's up to the young people now to sort of like embrace all these concepts that are coming in, like the climate justice one. What we are saying is the climate justice is almost calling all of us to say, let us look at these things equally. We are all human. I mean, we suffer equally. So really, at the core of it is we must really embrace it, that climate justice is about us seeing each other as humans, seeing each other that we have one world, seeing each other that in this world we all have a responsibility to make sure that we make it greener. We make sure that it is habitable for everyone. We make sure that everyone is resilient to the shocks that come with climate change. Thank you.
I think the question of colonization, to me, one of the problems I have with it is that it has this dichotomy that it's white people that are sort of impacting or oppressing Black people, and Black people have no agency to solve any of their problems. And I find that to be very condescending, because some of the problems we're having, for example, if we look at the situation in Malawi with climate change, one of the biggest problems we're having is deforestation. And we all know how that connects with climate change. Now, of course, richer countries are having a large impact on Malawi, no one's denying that. But it's as if Malawi is not making certain behaviors, or Malawians, as Malawians, there's certain behaviors that are contributing to the problem even worse. Deforestation, it's not white people that are causing that. It's not colonization that's doing that. It's Black people cutting down trees. We need to sort of look at what the problem is now. And some of the problems, yes, rich countries are contributing to that, but Malawians are too. We don't lack agency. We have a responsibility ourselves, particularly when it comes to the destruction of the environment and providing the poor with options. I think Edgar rightly said, we need to provide energy solutions or energy alternatives. And we've just not done that. That is on us in terms of how we do that. And I think the relationship between Malawi and the West, and in this case, Scotland, is trying to learn and tap experience, technology, knowledge that can help us do better. But it has to be driven by Malawians to ask for that. So I just want to make that point. Colonization, it shouldn't just be about Black versus white, as if Black people don't have agency and cannot be held responsible. We are also responsible for certain aspects of this crisis.
I would maybe come back on what you're saying a little, because I do think that particular that colonization can still be seen as rife here in some ways. I mean, the way some people depict it is we have a carbon budget, right? So that the amount of carbon that we are able to put into the atmosphere, and you can then draw a line and say how much that is in order to be consistent with 1.5. And what some people say is that the rich countries like Scotland have colonized that carbon budget essentially because they've taken up the budget, and then there's not any budget left for countries like Malawi to also emit what they ought to be emitting. And then when you have COP26 comes and it essentially, I think quite rightly, Malawian government will be there acting with other governments and saying, look, this is not fair. And regardless of colonization question, it's just an interstate question, right? You've got one state and their actions are harming another state, and then they're not being compensated for it. That's not fair. That's an injustice. And so, but I do absolutely agree with your point about agency, and I think that's also really, really important, especially within climate debates within Malawi, for sure.
And I think you make an excellent point. The point is justice, not colonization, in that particular case, because it's really about the fairness of it. If it's not fair, it's not fair. It doesn't matter if it's a nation of a white nation doing it or a nation that is predominantly people of color. It doesn't matter. It's an issue of, is it fair? It doesn't matter what the skin color of the person who's doing it. So it's really an issue of fairness.
Thank you, Muti. I wonder, Holly, before we move on, if you have anything to comment or you want to add something about...
No, actually, I think I've agreed with most of what you've been saying, and it's really interesting as well, because, I think just conversations like this are really important, because I think, a lot of it is about, I think, color, white versus black, and colonization. And I think that in a way sort of stops conversations like this happening. So I'm just going off track. Stops conversations like this happening because there's a sense of unfairness and sort of guilt, which I think can stop white activists from talking to black activists. So I think I just think conversations like this are really important, and it's been really interesting to hear what everyone's been saying.
Dani, can I clap hands for Holly?
I'll allow it.
Thank you. Exactly. That's the problem. It stops you from having the conversation. Exactly, Holly. Thank you very much.
I'm wondering then, with all of what we've just said in mind, what is the value of recognizing the historical injustices in our current climate justice efforts?
I think the question was about the colonization and how it has affected the agency. And indeed, later on, as Ben was saying, talking about justice, I mean, it's difficult. And that would be cheating ourselves if we say we're going to ignore the past. We are not saying that we should be stuck in the past, but the past must help us to understand what injustices happen and why should we talk of climate justice now. Thank you.
I think I concur with what Edgar said, is that the purpose of the past is that we should learn from it. I just wrote a blog about this. I wrote the following sentence. I said, we shouldn't allow our problematic past to hold our ever hopeful future hostage. Because I think our obsession with the past and our fixation with it holds us and stops us from moving forward. What the purpose of the past is to learn from it, right? As rightly as Edgar said, that we should look at it, learn from it, and make sure we don't make those same mistakes.
Thank you so much, Rudy. And I want to make sure we get to some more audience questions before we wrap up. So we've got a question here from Chinsisi saying, what do you guys think would happen if African countries were the highest contributors of climate change and Western countries were the most affected? Sort of a vice versa of the situation now, or something else? I wonder if Holly or Ben wanted to start us off. Any thoughts on that?
I think that the point is that it hasn't, and I don't think that's a mistake, because it wasn't like a flip of the coin and, countries like the UK just, at the flip of a coin became the colonizers. But I guess if it was the other way around, I don't really know. It's not something I've ever been asked before. But I think it's important to understand that it wasn't an accident what happened. And I think we definitely do need to hold ourselves accountable. And even though, yes, it's important not to obsess over the past, we do need to understand what happens so we can, number one, undo systems that have been put in place and move forward so that, yeah, these things don't happen again.
So I know that, Holly, you mentioned that sort of a very big part of the youth climate movement here in Scotland is focused around social justice issues. So would you say in the Scottish context, there is quite a sort of high level of understanding and use of the concept of climate justice?
Yeah, definitely in youth climate movement, it's pretty much, accepted, like that, yeah, social justice is linked to climate change, and that you can't like solve climate change without dealing with, the various inequalities and poverty issues that are happening. But that's only really in the youth climate space, I think. I'm not sure because I haven't been involved with like adult movements so much, but yeah, again, like that knowledge is only within youth climate space, and as soon as you move out of that into the general youth population and in schools, environmental education is pretty basic already. And I think as soon as people realize that climate justice is so important and that by joining this movement you can help deal with all of those issues, then it will become, I think, much easier to change it, because as soon as it's linked, then obviously a lot more people will want to deal with climate change. In the youth climate space, it's very, very widely accepted and well known, and outside of that, it's just not linked at all. It's not thought about, which definitely needs to be improved along with general education on climate issues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Holly. Very good point. And I wonder if Edgar or Muti, if you want to comment on the sort of the youth knowledge of climate justice in the Malawian context.
Yeah, I think I follow most about the youth knowledge on climate justice through, I think, the work of Malawi Scotland Partnership. I think they are doing a very fantastic project of bringing together the youth and making sure that they speak and they talk about issues of climate justice in the open. Ourselves too, we are currently working very much with the decentralized structures. Of course, we will be mourning the tendency of the elders monopolizing the leadership positions, so much so that we've got difficulties to reach the youth. But in our work too, I think we've made some deliberate efforts to make sure that we target the youth, capacitate them in renewable energy technologies, different ones, as well as even making them aware as to why we are promoting renewable energy technologies. And within that, I think we also address issues of climate justice.
And we're going to have to wrap up soon because we've run a bit over, but I just wanted to say a quick opportunity if any of our panelists want to add anything to end off the conversation.
Sorry, I think just two things to wrap up with. I think we always complain of the youth. Sometimes also the youth this is the time to demonstrate that ourselves, we are reliable, we can take up the tasks. Because I think you often, Muti will agree with me, when you go around and, you try to advocate for youth inclusion, often, the elders always say, no, you guys, you are too playful and all that. I think it's high time the youth, we rise up to the occasion and ensure that we are ready, we want to take this thing, we are making our own destiny. It's important to do that.
Young people, you don't need the permission of old people to. I think because of culture in Malawi, young people wait for elders to give them permission to exist. You exist. No, you don't need permission of the older generation to take over. And the second thing I want to say, and this is specifically to younger people in Scotland, privilege is not a bad word. You have certain privileges that you enjoy because of the legacy. Yes, some of it is negative, but some of it is also positive. There's a lot of positive things, and I'll speak specifically to Scotland. You have great people who have come out of Scotland. Tap into the good and use that to forge a better future. And do not be ashamed of the privileges your ancestors made for you. Use them to make the world a better. So don't be ashamed of those privileges. Use them.
Thank you so much, Muti. And yeah, thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. This has been a really fascinating discussion. And I think, a lot of ideas that have really definitely for me, added to a much richer understanding of the concept of climate justice.
Thank you so much, everyone. That has been an incredible panel discussion. I can see Edgar giving a round of applause. I'd love to give a round of applause as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Okay, that's all from me tonight. Thank you so much for staying on this call till the end, everyone who's still with us. It's an absolute pleasure to have Dani from our youth committee hosting this event. Thank you so much to our incredible panel, Muti, Holly, Edgar and Ben. We cannot thank you enough for your time. A round of applause for all of you, and I'm sure everyone is doing at home. So thank you and good night.